Welcome, Erev Tov, good evening. And on behalf of our two main sponsors, Congregation B'nai Shalom and Contra Costa Jewish Community Center and its Under 110 program, I want to wish everyone a wonderful and healthy 5781. So Shana Tova, and may you be sealed in the book of life for many years, not just the present and coming one. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, we're going to make sure that everyone is muted. But when you want to ask questions, you can move your mouse to the bottom of your screen where it says chat. Click on that, and then you could type in questions which we'll read to our speaker. During the Q&A. I also want to let you know that Amos Guiora's book is available at bookstores. If you can order them online, you can order them by phone, and Rakestraw Books in Danville, and also Flashlight Books in Walnut Creek. If you hear panting, it's my dog who is saying hello to everyone. Flashlight Books in Walnut Creek. They will do curbside pickup, so you don't have to go into the store. And I believe that Rakestraw will also ship the book to your house. So please support your local or our local bookstores. I'd like to read the biography, and then we'll start with the program, Armies of Enablers. Amos Guiora is professor of law at the University of Utah Law School. In addition, he is a research associate at the University of Oxford Institute for Ethics, Law, and Armed Conflict, and a policy advisor for the Alliance for a Better Utah. He was born in Israel and later graduated from Kenyon College with honors in history. He got his law degree from Case Western Reserve University, and then immigrated to Israel, where he served in the Israel Defense Forces, attaining the rank of lieutenant colonel. He has published extensively, and in fact, we've had him speak for the Contra Costa Jewish Community Center and the Jewish Federation several times, especially on his previous book, which was called The Crime of Complicity, the Bystander in the Holocaust. Again, his book is available for purchase at local bookstores and on the internet. And now it is our great privilege to, I should add one more thing, that this is done in partnership with Diablo Valley Hadassah and also with J-Corps of Rossmore. And on behalf of the JCC and Congregation B'nai Shalom, we're privileged to have our speaker, Amos Guiora. Thank you, Amos.
Thank you, Reba. So good evening to all of you. I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your busy schedules. Those of you who are not NBA fans or whatever, to have this conversation this evening. By way of background, to add to Reva's very gracious and generous comments, the previous book called The Crime of Complicity, the Bystander in the Holocaust, is in many ways the precursor to the book which comes out literally today, tomorrow, this week, the new book, which is called Armies of Enablers, which is the theme of tonight's talk. But to explain the present book, I have to explain the previous book and then the connection between the two, and to take it from there. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm the only child of two Holocaust survivors. And I grew up in a home where the word Holocaust was never spoken. So I grew up not knowing anything about my parents. With one exception, when I was 12 years old, my father took me canoeing and told me his story and told me her story, but what he told me, as I know today, was incorrect. But that was deliberate on his part. Fast forward to 7 or 8 years ago, I was training for the Salt Lake Marathon, and my running partner, who's not Jewish, said to me in one of those endlessly long and brutal 20-mile runs, just making conversation, she said to me, "How did this happen?" This being the Holocaust. And I had a brilliant academic answer, which was, I have no idea, because I really had no idea. And I came home and I said to myself at the age of 55 or 56, that the time has come to learn about my parents and to also learn about the Holocaust. And so I did what many others have done, and I became autodidactic, and I read as much as you can read. Never say everything, because there's so much to read. And the more I read about the Holocaust, I realized there was one question that was largely unaddressed, and that was the bystander. And there had been two previous books written about the bystander, one examining the bystander from a historical perspective, one examining it from a sociological perspective, but there had never been a book that examined it from the legal perspective. So because I'm a law professor, I said, this would be kind of interesting to examine the bystander from the perspective of the law, asking whether or not being a bystander is a crime. But I wanted to do it through the lens of the Holocaust, and particularly through the lens of my parents. So I embarked on a pretty intensive journey. I hate the word, but it was a journey to research my parents without real cooperation from my parents, in order to understand their Holocaust experiences, travails, which are awful, but more importantly, to understand the role of the bystander in my parents' travails. And at the end of the day, I wrote a book and it came out, and I today can talk forever about my parents. I can talk endlessly about the bystander and the Holocaust. But what became clear to me after the book came out, and it's been translated into Chinese and Dutch, and I've given, talks around the world in the book, that this theme of bystander and complicity is something well worth discussing, full stop. But then I said to myself, I have other things I want to write, and these books are difficult to do because, these are terrible topics to discuss and to interview people and to get their stories. But 2 years ago, I was having dinner with my publisher, which is the American Bar Association in Chicago. And the publisher said, what's next? And I said, I'm out. I'm done with this bystander complicity stuff, whatever. And he said to me, but you're a sports fan. I said, I am. And he said, you know about Michigan State? I said, I do. And he said, you know about the Catholic Church? I said, I do. He said, well, there's your book. I said, oh, okay, great. And I wish that I could tell you that he plowed me with alcohol, but I don't drink. But he did plow me with a big piece of cake. Big old piece of cake. And I guess that did the trick, because at the end of the 3-hour dinner, I went back to the hotel room saying, I've just agreed to write a book. I have no idea what the hell I'm going to write about. And, I knew enough about Larry Nassar and the women at Michigan State who had been abused. And I knew obviously enough about the Catholic Church to start researching. And I started, we all have different writing styles, those of us who write. I research and write simultaneously. Research, write, research. And I started writing drafts, and I sent them. I have a team that works with me. And 2 years ago, we gathered in my apartment here. There were 7 or 8 people, all who have read, all who were either like Zooming like this or in my apartment. And the universal opinion of everything I had written at the beginning of this new book was that it was awful. And I want to emphasize that. Everybody said to me, throw it out, start all over again. And I said, I really don't know what to do. Then fortuitously, long story short, I was introduced to one of the Michigan State women who was assaulted by Larry Nassar. And we were Skyping, and I'm talking about the bystander. And she finally cut me off. And she said, you're missing it totally. This is about the enabler. In all of our cases, there was nobody in the room present when Larry Nassar assaulted us. This is all about the enabler. So at the end of that 1-hour conversation with this woman, she's in the book. She's Jane Doe. She didn't want to be named by name. I had a book. That was it. And then I reached out to an attorney who represents many of the Michigan State and USA gymnastics women. It was hard to get a hold of him because he wasn't sure he wanted to cooperate with me. But at the end of the day, he cooperated with me. And through him, I got to 5 women who I spent significant amount of time with interviewing them. I flew to California, to Irvine, and I flew also to East Lansing. And this is important to, when you put together a book, one of the women I met with was a student at Michigan State. And how do you call a book, right? Army enablers. And she said to me, Amos, this is not an army. These are armies. And that is essential to our conversation. Because what she said to me is wherever I looked, and she's been assaulted by Nassar, who knows, 100 times. Wherever she looked, there was someone who blocked her. And it's armies of enablers. But her story is really important for our purposes. She was the captain. She was the captain of the Michigan State gymnastics team. She's a junior in college, so she's 20 to 21 years old. She goes to her coach, whose name is Kathy Klages, who's prominent in the book. And she says to Klages, this is what's been happening for years. Enough. I'm being assaulted by Nassar. I'm not being treated. I'm being assaulted. And Klages, the coach, says to her 3 things. 1, Lindsay, if you complain, I'm going to have to talk to your parents. What? She's 20 years old. I mean, I have to talk to anybody's parents. 2, if you complain, I want you to think about how this will impact Larry and his family. And 3, Lindsay, I remind you, says Coach Klages, scholarships are given, scholarships are taken. Kathy Klages, the gymnastics coach at Michigan State, is in a place which is a good for a place for her to be today. She's in jail. And that's a good place for her to be, because this is a woman who is horrible, who absolutely enabled Larry Nassar's sexual abuse of the girls, of the athletes. So the first part of the book is Armies of Enablers. Through this attorney, I got to one of the most extraordinary women who I've spent, I don't know how many hours with her. She's also prominent in the book. Her name is Tiffany Thomas Lopez. She was a softball player at Michigan State University. She's assaulted by Larry Nassar, if I recall correctly, 250 times. The numbers here are staggering. Tiffany, at some point, goes to the trainer, the athletic trainer, a woman named Hayden, and in a hotel room, graphically doesn't tell, but demonstrates to Hayden, what Nassar's been doing to her, leaving no doubt whatsoever. This is not ankle treatment. This is penetration, no more and no less. Hayden is horrified and shocked and, oh my God, this is terrible, and sends her to talk to the head trainer. So rather than doing something, she sends Tiffany to talk to the head trainer, whose name is Destiny. Destiny is a terrible person. What Destiny does, and I write about Destiny a lot in the book, she stars in the book, is she in essence manipulates the situation so that Tiffany is removed from the baseball team. That's an enabler. So wherever Tiffany went, there are enablers. And the enablers had one purpose and one purpose only in mind. And that was to protect the institution, Michigan State University, to protect Larry Nassar, who's the iconic Michigan State USA gymnastics doctor, at the extent of protecting the vulnerable. Fast forward. I interviewed and spent significant time with a guy. His name is Peter. He's in the book prominently. Those of you who have seen the award-winning documentary Spotlight, that won the Pulitzer Prize for the Boston Globe, Peter is prominent in Spotlight. Peter's 14 years old. He's being assaulted by the parish priest. Peter, and I apologize, but we're all adults here, otherwise we can't have these conversations. Peter is sitting on the priest's lap, being assaulted. In walks the Monsignor, who sees it. And the Monsignor says to the priest, and I quote, "When you're done, just turn off the lights." That's an enabler. So we have Tiffany, we have Lindsay, Michigan State, we have Peter. Worse than that. One of the other women who with her have spent, I don't know how many hours, her name is Maddie Larson. She's in the book prominently also. Maddie Larson is borderline U.S. Olympic gymnast. I mean, she's right there. She's one of America's 4 or 5 top gymnasts. At these meets, which are held around the world, the girls are sent alone in the evening from their hotel room to go tuck in the corridor, to go to the room where Nassar is by himself. And as Maddie says, and she's right, and it's in the book, how did they, being the USA gymnastic officials, how did they allow me, a 14-year-old girl, to go alone in the evening to a man's hotel room when he too is alone? That's extraordinary. Those are all enablers. So in the book is premised on one question that, to me, it's surprising, that has never been asked before. I asked the survivors one question. What were your expectations of the enabler? And I have to confess that the women and men knew that I was not interested in the assaults themselves. I don't write about the predators. The predator doesn't interest me. What interests me is this complicated relationship between the enabler, the bystander, and this theme of complicity. So when I asked them, what were your expectations? The answer was simple. to protect me. And then when I came back to Maddie and I said, tell me about this theme of being protected, it was Maddie who said to me the following. She's 100% right. I was abandoned. And that theme of being abandoned is essential to our discussion. Another example. A male swimmer at Ohio State University is assaulted by the doctor. His name is Richard Strauss. He goes, this guy, he's also in the book. He's anonymous in the book. He goes from the doctor's office to the pool deck, and he says to the coach, Coach, this just happened to me. I have just been assaulted. The coach looks at him and yells at him, so everybody can hear. Says to our John Doe, says, shut up and get in the pool now. What are the consequences of that? So that night, our swimmer quits the swim team, drops out of Ohio State, leaves Ohio State. He's today he's my age type thing. Has never really been able to put his life back together. Why do I share that with you? Because for us to really understand the consequences of the enabler and the bystander, but for tonight, the enabler, it's essential that we understand that the consequences go way beyond shut up and get in the pool, or way beyond that particular assault. The consequences are life-changing. Of the 20 to 25 people who I spent 15 months with, it's pretty accurate to say that a mere handful, by their own account, have been able to go on and have, I don't like this terminology, normal, fruitful, happy, successful lives, relationships. The consequences are enormous. So when I went from interview to interview to interview to interview to interview, a couple of things happened. One, I was overwhelmed by the fact that these people trusted me. They trusted me with their stories. And that is extraordinary, to have people who don't know me from Adam to trust me with these terrible, terrible stories. In return, I made them two promises. Promise number one is to, evenings like tonight, and I want to thank Reva for this, I will speak to anyone. And as Reva knows, I've spoken to groups as small as 3 people and groups as large as 1,000 people. I will talk to anyone about this, because the book is about bringing to the readers, the public's attention, the voice of the survivors. And the public has to confront this, has to be confronted with this. So I made the one promise: I'll speak to anybody, anywhere in the world. Zoom makes it easier, right? I mean, it's fun to come to Cali, but here I am in Salt Lake City. I'll talk to anybody about this stuff. And the second promise I made them is the following: that I will be involved in any effort possible, whether it's with legislators, with educators, with advocacy groups, with survivor groups, with whomever, to address concretely the issue of the enabler. Now we need to go back. As a result of the first book, The Crime of Complicity, I have become extremely and deeply engaged in legislating or criminalizing the bystander. And I'm of the firm belief that, much like I've been involved in criminalizing the bystander, there's a requirement to criminalize the enabler. So here in Utah, we have 3 times come before the Utah the House of Representatives. Yes, we've lost, but we'll keep coming back, because it's a hard fight, because it's a crime of omission rather than crime of commission, because you're failing to act. But when I think about all those 14-year-old girls and boys who are beyond vulnerable and beyond unprotected, and under the guise of whatever institution it is, here's the reality, as unpleasant as it is. What they are facing is what I call institutional complicity. And across the board, whether it's university presidents, university coaches, trainers, everybody, not everybody, but the overwhelming majority of people at the end of the day cast their ballot with the institution. And they leave the vulnerable person alone. They lie to them. Example: Stephen Snyder Hill was a student. He's not an athlete. He's one of the few non-athletes I interviewed. He is assaulted by the doctor at Ohio State named Richard Strauss. And when I say assaulted, I mean assaulted. Steve goes to the student health services and meets with the director of the student health services, who says to him, "Oh my God, this is terrible. We've never heard of this before. This is horrible. Oh my God." And then what he does, the director of the student health services, the next day he has Steve meet with Strauss, which you can't do, and confront him, which you can't do. But all under the guise of, this is terrible. We've never heard about this before. It's a lie. A few days before Stephen Snyder-Hill was assaulted by Strauss, another student had been assaulted and went to Ted Grace, the director of the health services, told him the exact same story. So when Grace tells Stephen Snyder-Hill this was the first time ever, it's a lie. That's an enabler. Today, Grace is a director of health services elsewhere, and Steve, who I've spent a lot of time with, is actively engaged in having his medical license removed, and that's exactly what needs to be happening. Because here's where we are. We can sit here and say, "Oh, woe is me, this is really bad, and gosh, bad things happen." Or we can raise our hands and say, "I'm in." And when I say I'm in as in being actively engaged in this effort to convince the public, to educate the public, that if we don't address this, the stories in the book, you can read about somebody else's stories in 10 years' time. And that, to me, is absolutely unacceptable. And speaking of enablers, those of you who follow the Catholic Church carefully, the ultimate enabler, the ultimate duplicitous, frankly, lying enabler was none other than Cardinal Law, the esteemed, iconic Cardinal of Boston. I include in the book, and I had to think about how to incorporate legal materials compared to non-legal material. I quote at length from his deposition because it's really important for me that a reader understand the mindset of an enabler. Those of you who remember Muhammad Ali, Bob like a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, whatever that was, like this and like this. That's what Cardinal Law does in his deposition, and it's disingenuous, it's insidious, but that's the way that the enablers work. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that interests the enabler is protecting the institution. I see the question. I'll get to the question. I'll get to questions in a bit. The theme for me that drives me today is to connect the bystander to the enabler, and for us to understand that the consequences of tolerating the bystander and the consequence of tolerating the enabler is that the vulnerable continues to be vulnerable. And it's clear to me as the day is long that institutions are about protecting institutions. And the loyalty of people who work at institutions in case after case after case, it's clear. I mean, I can walk you endlessly through Michigan State, Ohio State, Catholic Church, USA Gymnastics, and Penn State. Though at Penn State, I was unable to interview any of the boys who were assaulted by Sandusky. It's the same pattern over and over and over again. And so when Reva suggested, having this gathering, and I obviously immediately said yes, because it's critical for me. And this sounds maybe a tad corny. I don't mean it like that. But I've been entrusted, if you will, by the survivors with these stories. And the only thing I know to do, as Reva knows, I know to do two things. I know how to gather stories, I know how to write the story, and then I know how to talk about it. That's what this is all about. And I get asked often now that I've begun book talks, like, what can I do? That's a great question. One is absolutely to be involved with advocacy groups, absolutely. Two, with education. Three, to reach out to legislators. Yes, I know it's election season, but it's over in 5 minutes. Because if we don't do that, if we don't pick up the mantle, then nothing will change. A couple of final words. So not only do I recommend criminalizing the enabler, there's a chapter in the book about a game plan, how to put that together. I'm also a big believer that universities need to be much more proactive and much more clear about to whom they owe a duty, and that when they fail in that duty, they need to be penalized. So I don't know how many of you are lawyers and how many of you are educators, but there's this whole thing called Title IX, which imposes obligations at a university. Secretary of Education DeVos recently put out new regulations, which I think are terrible. They're going to be challenged in court, which is a good thing, because what she fails at, from my perspective, is to articulate clearly and concisely that the university's primary obligation is to the victim. And in case after case, that clearly has not happened. For me, we have no choice but to address this head on. Otherwise, I don't know how to make this any clearer to you than that. In 5 years' time, somebody other than Amos Guiora will write the exact same book. And that's, I think, something that does a profound disservice to those who were assaulted, those who are being assaulted as we speak tonight, and those who will be assaulted. Because it's clear to me that what happened at those institutions is happening, right now. And those of you who follow these things really carefully, you might know that the new batch of lawsuits is directed at the University of Michigan. I need to add in parentheses, I grew up in Ann Arbor. My father was on the faculty of the medical school of Michigan when there was a University of Michigan team doctor who's now dead. But there are an overwhelming number of former athletes, primarily football players, who are filing suit against Michigan. I'm in contact with one of them. There's going to be evidently a documentary made about him. And it's essential to go public with this. I would like to think, I'm not naive, that a book like this and talks like this and the documentary made by this guy, his name is John Bond, you can read about him online. What makes his story unique, and he's beyond courageous, again, those of you who are sports fans, John Bond is the first big-time Division I football player, NFL player, African-American, who went public with being sexually assaulted. He's beyond courageous. Is he getting pushback? Yes. You can find his documentary. It's a short, docu-short, which is on YouTube. His name is John Bond. It was released 2 weeks ago tonight. It's overwhelmingly powerful. His name is John, Jon Bond, Baughn. It is, I think, required watching. It's 13 minutes long. I'm honored to be in it. And he walks you through the assault, but more than that, he walks you through the enablers, step by step by step. He's extremely articulate, and it grabs you. And you can't turn it off. And those of you who are going to watch it, I warn you, it's as graphic can be graphic. But John decided that's the only way for people to understand. So where do we go with all this? We can all continue with our lives as is, or we can say, hey, we have a real problem here. And I respectfully suggest, raise my hand, that we have a problem. We have a huge problem. I've been asked, am I obsessed about this? And the answer is hell yes. I mean, I'm all in as all in can be. And it's not the perp that worries me. It's the enabler and the bystander. And there's a direct link between the two. We need to address that. Reva, questions, anxieties, concerns, unless I put everybody to sleep.
Thank you. Thank you for really sharing this very important subject with our community. And I'm sure, as you said, that there are steps in your book on how we can follow up on it.
Absolutely.
So everyone, if you have questions, go to your chat function and type it in. The question is, were parents told by the athletes, or were maybe the athletes too embarrassed to go to their parents?
Right.
But if so, what did the parents do? Because they're adults.
So I'll begin. Jane Doe 1, the woman who I Skyped with in March, the first woman I spoke with. Her parents are in the room when Larry Nassar assaults her. But he had the bed and the screen in such a way that her parents, neither the mother nor the father at all understood what had happened. She never shared with them. But there is a father, Larry Nassar's youngest victim, not first, youngest, is a woman named Kylie Stevens. Her parents, this is a terrible, by the way, these are all horrible stories. Kylie was 6 or 7 when Nasser started assaulting her. In the basement of Nasser's home, when Kylie's parents were upstairs having coffee with Nasser's wife. And Kylie at some point told her parents what was happening. And the parents did not believe her. For years, they did not believe her. And during the course, at some point, a couple of years ago, the father realized that Kylie, for all these years, had been speaking the truth. And when he came to that realization, he committed suicide. Most of the girls and the guys did not share with their parents. I also made a decision when I began the book that I am not going to write about the parents. I leave that to others. The role of the parent as an enabler, I'm just not going to go there, and I leave that to others. There's another father who also did not believe his daughter. When he finally came to the realization that she too had been speaking the truth all the years, he too put an end to his life. The ramifications and consequences of this are awful, but that raises a different point. And studies show this left, right, and center. In the overwhelming majority of cases, when survivors come and report to parents, coaches, trainers, doctors, they're not believed. And if there's one thing that I've learned in the last 15 or last 2 years, it is two conflicting statistics. One, that they're not believed. And two, that somewhere between 95 to 98% of survivors who come forward to complain are speaking the truth. The failure to believe them is overwhelming. I spent Sunday afternoon with a woman here in Salt Lake City, we'll call her Jane, who is the victim of abuse and assault. Not believed and not believed and not believed and not believed and not believed. And just in the nick of time, she was able to extract herself and her child from, a marriage gone awry. And every corner she turned to, she was not believed. And that is, I don't have an answer as to why. Maybe it makes us all as uncomfortable as hell. It could be. But that's not a particularly compelling reason why not to believe them, but that's the reality. And that, by the way, also goes to the whole Title IX thing of she comes or he comes, by the way, he or she or it, they, the whole gender neutral thing, come and complain. The point is to believe them. Jim Jordan, so Jim Jordan. So I interviewed guys who were in the wrestling team at Ohio State when Jordan had just started being the assistant coach. You can agree with this, disagree with this. They are not angry at Jim Jordan as assistant coach, but he knew. It's documented. It's in the book. It's documented that Jordan knew as the assistant coach. But the guys on the team are not angry, or rather, the guys I spoke with are not angry at the Jim Jordan as assistant coach from 30 years ago. They are beyond pissed off at Jim Jordan today, saying that he didn't know then. And they make a very clear distinction. You can agree with that, you can disagree with that. They say, listen, if the head coach didn't do anything, then what can you expect from the assistant coach? Today, Jim Jordan, as somebody, they perceive him as he's just lying. But, Jim Jordan's about Jim Jordan. And so what really irritates them, angers them, some of these guys are seething, is that he's lying today about not knowing then when it was clear what was happening. And so you can agree with that, you can disagree with that, but that's how, at least those who I spoke with, that's how they delineate between Jordan of yesterday and Jordan of today. That's how that's how they view it. You can agree with that, disagree with that. There was a sense that if the head coach didn't act, then what can you expect from first year or second year assistant coach who had just been their teammate? Different people have different thoughts on that, but they're not mad about that. They're mad about today. I need to, maybe in the context of the parental question, there's a woman named, she's in the book, so I can speak about her openly. Her name is Sarah Shiley. Sarah Shiley lives in Buffalo, New York. She was assaulted from the age of 7 to the age of 14 by the parish priest. Most of the assaults, not all, somewhere between many to most of the assaults, occurred in the parents' living room. What these priests do, they are masters at grooming. And they know, quote unquote, which are stronger families, weaker families, more vulnerable families, socioeconomically weak, structurally weak. And in a certain sense, Sarah fit into that. And so for 7 years, she is assaulted by what angers Sarah Shiley, who is beyond courageous. You need to add about Sarah, she's a third grade teacher in Buffalo, and she agreed to be public in the book. I mean, she's named in the book. Why? Because she wants her students to know about her. She wants a name to a face and a face to the name. I cannot imagine how much strength that took by her. What really angers her is not the assaulting priest, but the whole structure around that simply moved the priest from parish to parish to parish to parish. And as a result of which the priest, who since I think has died, was never, ever penalized under any condition or sanction or whatever. Just, that's where cardinal law, that's why I included his deposition. Cardinal law is the master of all this. Jeffrey Epstein and friends. So I need to give a shout out to my colleague, Paul Cassell. Cassell, who like me is a professor at Utah, he's been working on the Epstein case somewhere 15 to 17 years. Jane Doe 1 in the Epstein case has been represented by Cassell for 15 years or so. She's the one in the famous picture with Prince Andrew where he's hugging a girl. That's Cassell's. That's Jane Doe 1. I don't remember her name, but she's out now. So yeah, Ms. Maxwell. I got interviewed by Australian TV this summer about Ms. Maxwell. It's interesting. I mean, she's horrible. She's somewhere on a line in the spectrum that was somewhere between a perp to an enabler. Some people tell me she's a perp. Some people told me she's an enabler. So when I got interviewed by Australian TV, I did the comfortable thing. I put her somewhere in the middle. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, court of law will say what the court of law says, but as far as we can all tell, whatever the word is, she was a madame, a procurer of girls she's a human trafficker. And Epstein's friends, I assume many of you saw the account today. It's either in Slater Saloon about dinner that Clinton had with Ms. Maxwell a couple of years ago. I don't know if we'll ever know the whole sordid story, but I need to give a shout out to my colleague Cassell, who has been dogged in going after Epstein and friends. But I mean, you can ask the same question about Harvey Weinstein, right, and others. I mean, it repeats itself time after time and time after time again, and that's why if the book serves the function of getting this out there, then from my perspective, there's nothing better I can hope for than that. I saw that somebody was gracious enough to ask about my father. Right, the last time I spoke, indeed, I cut the shiva short to come to give a talk in San Francisco. Wow, what a memory. That's right. My mother is 88 and a half years old and alive and well in Jerusalem. Thank you for asking. That's very gracious. Thank you.
Question. Do you see these cases as well in other parts of the world, or is it much more in the United States?
There was a report this summer about a similar case in England. I reached out to the reporter from The Guardian. There's a case in Israel with the girls, either gymnastics or a crew, or a yacht, whatever it's called, the sailing team. There was sexual misconduct, grooming. I tell you where I do see it in Israel, absolutely, is in Orthodox communities. And there's no doubt about that. The fact that we know that there's significant sexual abuse in Orthodox communities, close community, self-governance, Um, we know who the perps are, but we also know who the enablers are. So in Israel, I would say absolutely yes. In terms of Orthodox community, I'm not sure about sports in Israel. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan in Israel, but I don't think we see it in sports in Israel. In terms of Europe, where we probably see it is in the close communities that, as far as I know of Islamic extremist groups that are closed, where the women pay a terrible price and society enables it. So I would say that's probably similar to the Orthodox community in Israel. I don't know about athletics in Europe, but if you really think about it, it's a vulnerable child who seeks to attain great success, surrounded by coaches and trainers who want to push and pull, to great success. And it's particularly, who's really particularly vulnerable are girl gymnasts, because it's such a hands-on sport. I apologize. It's such a hands-on sport. They're really young, and they peak at 14, 15, and it really, really lends itself. And that was the story with the Caroli Ranch in Texas. But everybody knew, and I should have added one other point. I didn't know this, I confess. There's big money in amateur sports, huge money. And there's huge money in Olympic sports. A lot of people make a lot of money. And money is a compelling influencer. And I confess I was not aware of that. I'm now doing a project with a professor at Yale on this very topic about how we go about creating institutions or mechanized or systemic institutions to protect the vulnerable young athlete under the guise of the abuse of athletes, which is a huge topic.
That's going to jump off from that. What is being put in place to protect young athletes now that you have to be deaf not to know, if you're a university, that this is taking place and it can be exposed, which is something that may influence them? Are they saying that you can't be alone with certain people, or there's a number to call if someone does something?
So first of all, so today, for instance, here at the University of Utah, if a student comes to me and says something just happened, I'm a mandatory reporter and I have to make a phone call. Absolutely. Health clinics, university health clinics are an interesting question. Some of them are imposing this requirement to have a chaperone with you when you're being examined. Not everybody wants a chaperone. I have a student who is a chaperone. I think that's really important. But I'll tell you a story, Reva. One of the people I interviewed, we'll call him Joe. He's the general counsel of a major American university, GC, a major American university. And he tells me the following. He says, Amos, and I quote, it's in the book, "On my watch, there will be no sexual assaults at this university." So that is such an outrageously stupid statement that words don't describe how outrageously stupid it is. And it's relevant to your question because what it really tells me is that so many of these people have their head in the sand. I mean, who the hell says on my watch there will be no sexual assaults? I mean, that's just so outrageously stupid. There are no words for it. We can talk about creating institutions. That's why I'm so intrigued about this possible project with the professor at Yale, because that really is what needs to be done. And I tell you what, Reva, it requires prioritizing what's important and what's not important. Is it more important to win on Saturday, or is it more important to protect the vulnerable person? And that's a decision the universities are going to have to make. And it's I'm not even sure it's a close call yet. That's what worries me. It's what keeps me up at night.
Any other questions? I don't see any more. With that, again, the book is Armies of Enablers. You can get it at bookstores all over the place. Just pick up the phone or go online. We support our local bookstores. So contact Rakestraw.
Oh, wait, let me ask how the university is being punished.
Okay.
In the last year, there have been, I don't remember the name of the university in Nebraska that settled a pretty significant amount of money. Michigan State had to pay out $500 million. We're going to have to see how the Michigan thing will resolve itself. It's unclear yet how much Ohio State's going to end up paying. So where will it hurt them in the pocketbook? And I've been told by people who are involved in this that at some point there'll be serious conversations between the insurers of universities and the universities, but I'm not sure we're there yet. That's an excellent question.
So again, the book is Armies of Enablers. If you want to see all the events for Under One Tent in the community, go to underonetent.org. On behalf of all of the sponsoring organizations and our speaker, Shana Tova, and thank you very much from the Contra Costa Jewish Community Center, Congregation B'nai Shalom, in partnership with Diablo Valley Hadassah and JCOR. And Amos Nesia Tova should go off to Israel.
Can I add one point?
Yes.
If anybody has, I'm going to type to you all my email. If anybody wants, or you can give it to them, Reba. If anybody has follow-up questions, anxieties, I will interact with anyone, anytime.
Okay, we'll send it out to everyone who's here.
I'll do it right now.
And when are you coming? Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to be in Israel, but there's always a computer.
There's always a computer. We have internet in Israel. It's a wonderful thing.
I'm sure. Anyhow, to everyone, thank you and Shana Tova. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.